Hi all, welcome to your introduction to theoretical integration in counseling. We are going to take a look at what that means and how we can do it. But before we begin, I just wanted to define a couple of terms because I remember some questions about just sort of defining some key terms that will help to make theoretical integration a little bit more easier. So to start, a theory is a generalized statement that seeks to explain a particular phenomenon, while a model is a specific tool to understand that phenomenon. So let me give you an example. Let's say I want to come up with a model for art therapy to work with children in educational settings. So what I'm going to do first is to understand what art therapy is and the underlying assumptions that guide it. As I understand it right now, there are a couple of different ways to approach the understanding of art therapy. So let's just say, for the sake of this example, I'm using a humanistically oriented understanding of art therapy. So I'm going to take my humanistic art therapy theory, and I want to make a model to work with children in the schools. So I would develop a model which would both be, it would be maybe a way of thinking and a way of practice in terms of working with children in that particular setting. So the model is a way to enact the theory. And I'll give you a couple more examples of this as we're moving through, and we will continue to take a look at this in class together. So there are so many theories that we have to learn in counseling. It's a little bit overwhelming, especially in the beginning when you're trying to figure out, which theories do I want to draw from and why. I told you the story of how I came to become a relational cultural theory therapist. I started out in this very class and thought to myself, why do I need a particular theoretical orientation? I do Abbey therapy. And really, that statement within itself is the reason that I needed to have a theoretical orientation. Because if I have one, then I know what my roadmap is when I'm working with clients. I know why my client is motivated. I understand why they might change. I have particular techniques or interventions that I'll use based on why I think they are motivated and what change processes need to occur, right? So all of that is interconnected. And we'll talk about some ways that we can sort of get lost when we don't have that roadmap. And so it's important to have at least one theory as a base, as your foundation, as you're moving forward as a CAT counselor. So I suggest starting with one, and then you can add in others. But, I guess sort of what's a little bit more complicated for my creative art therapists are that you have to be you come out as an integrative practitioner because you are using a particular approach to therapy, right? You're using tools and ideas that come from art, dance, movement, or music, but you are also using theory within those particular lenses to inform how you'll work in each of those specialties. So I really think of it, let's say that your counseling lenses, you put your yellow person-centered glasses on, and then I'm going to put my blue counseling theory lens on, and that's going to help me to see green. So just one metaphor. So and you want to have at least one so that you don't end up sort of being sloppy and pulling from all different types of techniques, and then you and the client don't really know when you've reached your goal and when therapy is over. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to really have a strong understanding of one theory. Last count that I heard, we have 437 theories in counseling. Nobody can be an expert in all of them. But I would say that we are as a field moving to use integrative approaches as the norm, rather than just using one, pure approach. That's really much less common these days. So integration refers to combining two or more theories, and eclecticism is really more about having one theory and then borrowing processes or techniques from another theory. But you still have one main theory that is informing why you're picking and choosing those particular techniques. So I wanted to begin with just giving you an example, and I'll come back to this several times and concretely walk you through how I developed my own approach to counseling, which I call the diamond of compassion. So this is a simulative, integrative example of how I work with clients. And at my foundation, I use relational cultural theory. I draw from cognitive behavioral theory, developmental approaches, mindfulness techniques, and creative techniques. But when I'm choosing to use one of those particular theoretical techniques, it's because I'm choosing to still to achieve a goal that's guided by a relational cultural framework. So we'll come back to take a look at how you can develop your own model or theoretical orientation. So there are a couple different ways to integrate, and I'm going to break these down. There's one called common factors. You can do theoretical integration, so bringing together two or more theories, a simulative integration, technical integration, and we'll take a look at sloppy thinking and sort of where people get lost in terms of integrating theory. But just to begin, we'll take a look at this first way that you can integrate theory. And this is called the common factors approach. And basically, there was this guy, Jerome Frank. He published a book called Persuasion and Healing. And he looked at all of the common factors that influence therapy across theories. So he looked at, what's common between person-centered and CBT and existential and feminist. What are these sort of core foundational ways of working with clients that we might be able to weave together in order to take a more integrative approach. So he said that, number one, the common factor that we would look at across many theories is the expectation of help. So, does the client think that we are going to be the expert? Are they leading the way? Is it somewhere in the middle? And that also would influence the therapeutic relationship. What kind of relationship are we establishing with each other? What is the rationale that explains the symptoms and how to solve them? So you want to have congruency there. And what is the active participation by the therapist and client in terms of procedures or rituals? So expectations of help, therapeutic relationship, rationale that explains symptoms, and the active participation of the therapist and client in procedures or rituals. So if I were bringing together existential theory, humanistic theory, and Gestalt, I would look at those four areas as a way to have an integrative approach. Those would be the sort of, if I were using a mind map or doing some brainstorming, the expectations of help, the therapeutic relationship, the rationale, and the active participation would all be in their own bubble, and then I would have a line coming off of that bubble for each theory, and then I would say how each theory does those things, and then I would work to resolve any differences or any conflicts between those particular theories in those areas. So again, this is just meant to be an overview. We will enact these in class. So if it feels like a little overwhelming right now, that's okay. We'll look at theoretical integration, and that's combining two or more theories. And at this point, we already have several theoretically integrated approaches. Like I said, they're really becoming more of the norm than the exception. So, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? That's cognitive approaches and behavioral approaches. And while it is often referred to now as CBT, cognitive behavioral approaches, the root theories that inform that are cognitive and behavioral. And then they've been integrated. Experiential therapy integrates humanistic and existential. Emotionally focused therapy integrates person-centered, Gestalt systems, and attachment theory. So these are all approaches, evidence-based approaches that have already been integrated for you, which is nice. So then we have assimilative integration. And again, this is where you are grounded in one theory, but you may pull from practices from other approaches. So I work from a relational cultural theory perspective, which is already an integrative perspective within itself, right? So I'm pulling from Rogerian ideas, psychodynamic ideas, multicultural ideas, feminist ideas, neuroscience ideas. These are all guiding what I believe about the change process, what I believe motivates clients, what I believe is important about therapy and the procedures and things that we do in therapy with the client. But in order to support deepening my relational connection with my client, or to get over a disconnection, I may pull from creativity, models of creativity, from mindfulness approaches, from developmental approaches, and from cognitive behavioral theory techniques. So that's an example of an assimilative integrative approach. You can also engage in what's called technical eclecticism. So technical eclecticism is really where you're focusing on a specific intervention for a client, and that is what's guiding you. And additionally, it's really only pulling from evidence-based practices. Now, I caution you from using technical eclecticism early on in your career, because this really means that you have a very deep and foundational understanding of all of the theories that have been presented in this class, both in terms of the way that you think, sort of theoretically in that model, but also how you practice. Because what ends up happening is, remember, that theories provide our roadmap. They tell us what our goals are in therapy, and it tells us when therapy's over. And so if we don't have that roadmap, then we're not going to know when therapy's done or when our client has reached their goals. Even having, the idea that, well, you reach the goal when the client tells you that they're reached their goal, that's a client-centered approach. That comes from a particular assumption about human behavior. So, but technical eclecticism, if you're this kind of therapist, then you are pulling from many different approaches, many different techniques. And it comes from a good place, right? People aren't sort of sloppy in their thinking because they want to be. It's usually because they have a client come in and they're like, oh no, this is such a complicated case. I'm going to try, the Miracle question, and then I'm going to try distorted thinking, and then I'm going to try role playing, and just sort of pulling from here and there. And all of those tools may work together, but you need to understand why they're going to work together if you're going to know, how you've been successful or not in therapy. It can also leave the client very confused. What type of therapy did they have, and how is it different from other therapies? And we have to be able to speak to that in providing informed consent. So again, I encourage you to stick with just one theory to begin with, and then each year or each time you're working in a different setting and population, right? A lot of this is also contextual. I draw from CBT because I worked in addictions, and evidence-based practice tells me that I need to address distorted thinking, and we'll have to do some behavioral modification in order for the client to stop using substances. So I had to pull from CBT based on the setting and population that I was in. And that's what I think that you'll find. The more populations that you work with, the more settings that you work with, working when I worked in private practice versus working in a college counseling center, those two contexts were very different. I had, often not very high functioning clients in private practice, but I had very high functioning clients in the college counseling center. So I needed to shift the way that I worked it based on the population. But at the end of the day, it didn't change my perspective that I believe that people have what they need within in order to, solve or be successful with whatever brought them in the door to come see me. So, but you're going to focus on just one approach at a time. That would be my recommendation. And where people really sort of get lost a little bit is that all of these theories that you've been learning have a philosophical underlying, right? These are ultimately the tools that let us know, that explains the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, existence, right? So let's take a look at these. These are sort of the schools of thought that the theories that we've been learning all fall within. So many modernist approaches, so here you have cognitive behavioral, traditional psychodynamic, they all have, pull from the logical, positivistic, the word I can never say, idea, and the counselor, so evidence-based approaches, the counselor is the expert, and so you will find that many that there are actually a fair number of people out there that integrate psychodynamic and cognitive behavioral approaches. In fact, I encourage you to go into the video library and just sort of click around. I would just look up cognitive behavioral approaches and then see what other theories counselors are integrating with it to tell you how they've resolved some of the conflicts in that integration. But it helps to know what philosophical school the theory falls under, because it will make it easier for you to integrate the theories. So think of these philosophical schools as the soil. We need different soil. If I have a lemon tree, and my lemon tree needs soil that lets water, releases water easily. That soil is modernist soil, and the tree that grows out of that is my cognitive behavioral or psychodynamically oriented theory, lemon tree. And then you have phenomenology, right? So this is looking at lived experiences of subjective realities. And again, if you go online and do some searches, I encourage you to do a lot of them. The more philosophical orientations, the more theoretical orientations that you read from other clinicians, the easier it will be for you to develop your own. So again, you will often find somebody that's person-centered, that uses person-centered Gestalt and existential theory all within their approach to therapy, because they all fall under the same umbrella. They have some of the same philosophical fundamental ideas about knowledge, reality, and existence. You have systems theory, and systems theory, basic idea that's very different from, for example, cognitive behavioral theory, that's really focused on addressing irrational thoughts with rational thoughts. In a systematic approach, right, we believe that systems will self-correct themselves for better or worse. There are things called feedback loops, and so if we're working from this particular approach, then we would, let's say we're going to integrate CBT with systems theory? Well, we know that, okay, so through a systematic lens, like a family will self-correct its behavior, for better or for worse. And that, let's say, let me give you for an example. So it's very common that you're going to need to do some family counseling when you have a client that's suffering from substance abuse issues. They often say that addiction starts in the family. That's a family disease. And so in order for that client to stop using or maintain sobriety, if that is their goal, then you have to work with the whole family system, but you may also have to correct some of the misperceptions or distorted thinking that the family is engaging in that's allowed for a particular system to maintain itself in a particular way. So in an addictions in a family where, let's say, you have a mom and a dad and 2 children, and one of those children is addicted, and so to make sure that the family maintains homeostasis, the parents have started to, let's say the child's older, they're in their 20s. The parents are still treating the child like that they're an adolescent. They're still trying to parent them, still trying to control their finances or who they hang out with. And so much about working with families in addiction, families where addiction is present, is to allow, is to help the family to address some of the distorted thinking that lets them believe, the irrational thoughts that make them to believe that if they do not overcompensate, if they do not overparent, that the addiction will get worse and it'll ultimately be their fault. And when in fact you need the parents to be less, what's often termed codependent, or less responsible for that individual if the family system is going to maintain a healthy homeostasis again. And so you may also have to provide some psychoeducation. Psychoeducation is a particular model or approach that comes from CBT. So I just wanted to provide you another example of how you might integrate with systems theory from the perspective that you must help the system to self-correct. And you have postmodern approaches that really look at social constructivism. And what theories are these? These are multicultural approaches. This is narrative theory, solution focused. It's a strength-based approach. It's going to look at social construction of gender, of cultural narratives. And so, it's really easy to, or I shouldn't say it's easy, it's easier to integrate postmodern approaches because, again, they share the same underlying constructivist ideas. So really what I want you to take from this the most is that it is very difficult to integrate theory. And so, just know that this takes a lot of practice, and if you feel really lost, what I would say is that probably your comprehension of the particular theory that you're interested in isn't quite deep enough yet. And so if you think that you are a person-centered therapist, cognitive behavioral therapist, then I really want to encourage you to develop a matrix and think about, what are the goals of the therapy? What are the beliefs about the change process, about what motivates the client, about what techniques that you're going to use? Because again, these theories are sort of easy to understand, but then when you have to start integrating with other theories, it starts to get complicated, because if you don't know how theories clash with each other, or if you have a sense that you're getting stuck, there may be a clash. So we'll be doing some mind mapping as a tool to work through some of the confusion that comes with integrating theory. So I just want you to hold on and be very kind to yourself as we move through thinking about integrating theory. All right, well, that is it for now. And what I would encourage you to do is just, if you would, think about what theories you're most attracted to in terms of integrating. Why do you think that is? Is there a particular philosophy that you are drawn to? Um, do you think that we're, that we, do you want to emphasize autonomy, growing through and towards relationships, strength-based, insight orientation, through behavior, maybe a little bit of it all? Again, I use what I call the diamond of compassion. So we will continue to explore this together in class. Again, don't forget to look at that mind mapping video in week 2 and really every land-based class that we have with each other. I'm going to make sure that we spend some time working to integrate that theory that we're learning that week with your specialties. If you have any questions, I'm also going to put up a question discussion board for week 1 that I will review before I come to class in week 2. All right, all. Thanks. Have a good one.